Expecting to hear official Pentagon data and document information regarding the mounting number of UFO sightings around the globe. That report did not come out as planned on Tuesday, but it's still expected soon. Back in March, former National Director of Intelligence John Ratcliffe sounded dead serious on the topic.
But frankly, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. Some of those have been declassified. When we talk about sightings, we're talking about objects that have been seen by Navy or Air Force pilots or have been picked up by satellite imagery that, frankly, engage in actions that are difficult to explain, that movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, or traveling at speeds that, exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom.
So without further delay, let's bring in KUSI aviation expert, former Navy combat pilot, Brian Sunshine Sinclair. Good morning, Brian. Welcome back to KUSI.
Morning, Paul. Pleasure to be here. How you doing?
I am doing well. First of all, correct me. I'm not supposed to say UFOs anymore, correct?
So you can, but you're right. The official term is going to be unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UAP. And Paul, there's a little bit of a paradigm shift in that they're trying to get rid of that cultural baggage or stigma of little green men, tinfoil hats, and flying saucers. And they want to just make sure that everyone feels comfortable, especially the pilots, to report these things and they don't get cajoled or laughed at.
Fair enough. Now, how many hours did you put inside a cockpit of a fighter plane?
About 2,800, Paul.
So, in all that time above the deck, if you will, did you ever encounter anything that you couldn't explain?
No, unfortunately, I didn't. So nothing exciting there.
But a lot of your brethren have. Let's start with, is it Dave? Am I pronouncing his name? Favre, the guy that was on CBS 60 Minutes. How do I pronounce his name?
Yeah, Dave Fravor.
All right,
yeah,
Fravor.
Dave Fravor.
Right, he was with his co-pilot, right? And they were on 60 Minutes talking about this.
They're actually. Yeah, so he was the skipper of an F-18 squadron. It's a 2-seat, and they were with a wingman, so a total of 4 guys that actually were able to track this Tic Tac. So this is one of 3 officially released Pentagon videos. This one's colloquially called the Tic Tac, as you can see there. And he's using his forward-looking infrared or FLIR camera to track this object.
And what's alarming here is it just makes maneuvers that you can't explain with like a regular plane, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so the thing is, this plane, unfortunately, you can't see it in the clip here, is about 20,000 feet. He's just going kind of max endurance, we call it, or just kind of think of it as 55 miles an hour on the highway. So he's just cruising along during the day, not a very dynamic environment. So they have plenty of time to actually look and try to track down this thing and to assess what it is. And they do note that it flies in almost physically impossible methods or ways.
And then closer to home, I believe this was off the coast of San Diego. This is the swarm that the USS Omaha experienced, correct?
It is, yeah. So you'll have radar and potentially you'll see some infrared footage of a single one of the drones or the UAPs, if you will. So the USS Omaha was commissioned in 2015. It's one of the Navy's leading edge, cutting edge, I should say, technology ships, called a littoral combat ship. And they're out there about 120 miles, as you said, off the coast, and it was nighttime, and they noticed a series of up to at least 14 objects within the vicinity of their ship flying around. Now you can imagine, Paul, that this. Oh, go ahead.
No. I just want to. Does this? This concerns you, right? I mean, is this some sort of military technology we don't know anything about?
So this does concern me. It concerned the people on the boat, as you can imagine, or the ship, excuse me, and it also concerns a big Navy and really the Department of Defense. So there's 2 levels of surprise. One could be strategic. So there could be security implications of, hey, some of our adversaries may have better technology than we do, so we need to catch up. And then there's also more immediate threat. That's going to be safety. So that USS Omaha can launch helicopters, and there's helicopters flying around at night. I, as a pilot, wouldn't want to be flying around at night and have 14 or so objects flying within my airspace, and with which I have no communication. So you can see how that would pose a more immediate safety threat.
Who's Bob Lazar, and why is he important to this conversation?
So good old Bob Lazar. So I urge the viewers at home to Google him. But back in the 80s, he came out and said, hey, that he was contracted by the Office of Naval Intelligence to reverse engineer some supposedly crashed extraterrestrial aircraft. And reverse engineer mean they're going to pick it apart, try to understand the technology, and then hopefully duplicate or replicate the technology and use it to our advantage.
So, and a lot of people are poo-pooing him. So let's just go back to the theme. In your view, what are we seeing? If you had to guess.
So dating back, they've had these unexplained aerial phenomena since the early 40s, really, with World War II. They used to call them Foo Fighters, Paul, as in, obviously everyone's familiar with the band, but that was just a term from a 1930s comic strip that the pilots in World War II, both Pacific and European theater, adapted to. They call them the Foo Fighters, just unexplained. And then over the years, folks have probably heard of Project Blue Book, which was funded by the Air Force in the 50s and 60s. They had over 12,000 reports of UFOs, and they were able to identify about 95% of them. So only 5% that they couldn't figure out. And a lot of those identifiable phenomenon were actually some kind of atmospheric conditions that interfered with normal sensor or the computer, or I should say actually the camera's optics. So they could be weather balloons in low light situations. And keep in mind, a lot of these platforms are going to be moving through the air. So the geometry actually gets very complex. As you can see by the F-18 there, you could move the camera, rotate the camera on the airplane, or the object of interest could be moving. And together they could create some kind of weird effect, if that makes sense.
So you're more concerned that this could be a technology that, say, China or somebody else has that we don't have, right? Yeah,
especially when there's off the coast, as we know here in San Diego, there were those 14 or so objects that were uncontrolled with which the USS Omaha could not communicate. And they could have been observing both the electronic emissions of the Omaha or trying to study some of the tactics of all the ships around it. So that's, I think, the bigger threat, if you will.
Well, Sunshine, we have to call it a conversation. Thank you for spending some of your morning with us.
It was a pleasure. Take care, Paul.
And when the Pentagon finally comes